away the boundaries. And you look at this as a system. And I think that we, you know, the two sessions that you've already had have talked a lot about this. Put in the buffers, and you start to see some real good ability for animals, right down to microorganisms, to begin to support the biodiversity. There's the sensitive ecosystems. There's the wildlife corridors. We don't think these are quite right in this area. They do need some ground truthing and some changing, but that takes funding, and funding is always a problem for NGOs. That, the last polygons that have come in there is the agricultural land reserve, and there is some protection on that land. So that's basically what we're kind of proposing, is you lay this down as a protection. This is what you protect. So you go to your own community, you look at the kind of mapping you have, you put these kind of buffers on, you look at where the wildlife is moving, and you put this kind of protection in place, and hopefully, to a certain extent, hopefully to even more, you know, even a great extent, that you make these areas off limits to development and infrastructure. That you use the natural systems more and more and more as your infrastructure, and think in terms of these systems. Here's another example. This is the Brooklyn Creek watershed. You can see that there's three distinct areas. There's the really infilled portion of Comox, very urban. You get into area B here in the watershed that's quite rural, and then into a new area in the city of Comox. Well, it's not so new anymore, but that's the Crown Isle development. So the land development upstream, of course, is creating problems downstream. This is something we all know about and have seen over and over and over again. So by taking a systems approach as we develop, hopefully we can stop these kinds of things. Comox not only built ponds to help control the flooding there, but there's been a lot of work in Salish Park, which is right there, over the years to try and solve some of these problems. And I think those problems are still ongoing to a certain extent. So this kind of conservation and regional planning really does benefit local government. Again, stopping those losses, and those ecosystems really have been linked to long-term infrastructure cost savings, tax stability, all of these things. Higher environmental standards. I think that everybody I've talked to in the last 3 years is talking about higher environmental standards. How do we get there? Proactive protection, we think, is how you get there. You lay down the protection and then you build around it. And I'll refer to that again a little later. The Nature Without Borders report does talk about some new tax incentives, new ways of recovering costs. What have we accomplished so far? We've got a commitment by all the local governments to endorse regional conservation planning as a first step in land use and growth management planning. And they've agreed to participate in a joint conservation planning project. And we've given, this is the 26th presentation we've given in less than a year. So we've been very busy. First of all, I want to talk about the endorsement and what the endorsement has done. The Nature Without Borders is now referenced in all of the initiatives that you've heard about. The RTS, the Regional Growth Strategy, the Sustainability Plan, and there's a Comox Valley Regional District Parks and Greenways strategy just being built. And Nature Without Borders is referenced in all of them. Very important now that we start to integrate these things together. This is probably our biggest challenge at this point, is to prevent the stovepiping from these various initiatives, and the designated team, particularly a regional team, would be very, very effective. So now I want to go on to talk about the joint conservation planning projects. One of them is just a definitions exercise. What is a greenway? So that we're all on the same page. But the other one is a gaps analysis, regulatory gaps analysis of the Millard Piercy watershed. That little watershed that we looked at, we're developing a work plan now to identify and set in motion a watershed-based approach. So we're just in the planning processes of that work plan right now. We're just about ready to take that back to our planner advisors and get their input on it. But again, to do this kind of thing, we're going to need that regional team. So why a watershed approach? These are all the things we know. These are the things that we can gain from taking these kind of systems approaches. A resolution of mutual intent. This is, I think, really key, that we make this commitment to work together. Common acknowledgement that there are problems and that the solutions for these problems exist in a watershed-based approach. And, of course, identification of all the point and non-point sources of problems. The steps to do this would be to build some public support, to create an inventory of the watershed, define the problems, set goals, develop solutions, create an action plan, implement and evaluate. Sorry I'm reading these. I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning last night putting this presentation together. It's new to me too. So we're all aware of these modern ways of doing business. These have been around for a while. Watershed-based land use planning is not new, but it's very difficult to accomplish with the sort of arbitrary jurisdictional types of boundaries that we're working with. So now the provincial government has spelled out a wonderful document supporting this kind of regional approach, and from a watershed perspective. When I first read this document, I was absolutely thrilled. Here's one of the quotes, though, from it. And I'm not trying to be facetious or difficult in this translation, but I do see some, it seems to me to be very thin. Water's getting to be more and more an issue, and to keep up this growth that we're currently enjoying, we need to gain water through conservation. So, agriculture does use most of our water to grow the food. We have to avoid pollution, so clean energy is important, but is that clean coal? Is that nuclear? I mean, I'm not against these things, but there's not a real clear direction in that quote as to what we really mean here. And our beautiful environment, is that all we're going to do is keep it pretty? I think we have to think a bit more deeper than that. The government position is that they're going to support communities to do watershed management planning. And of course, we've talked about the kind of resolutions to the problems that we can gain through that. This was a very interesting document that came to my attention in preparation for the governance workshop that I attended the last 2 days. And one quote from that is, "Water is the lifeblood of civilization." So a planning approach based on a future scenario that integrates human needs with ecological limits. Does that sound familiar? It's kind of the nature without borders concept. It's kind of the concept that we mapped out for you in the series of illustrations. 50% of new municipal water needs will be acquired through conservation, and government will look at new ways to help promising water conservation technologies succeed. These are key and important elements of this new Living Water Smart document. How can you become a champion in your community to change these things and do business differently? That's a question I can't answer for you. I have been a champion of these things for many years now. I continue to speak and I continue to cajole. I meet with people. I learn as much as I can, and I'm in a continual loop. People talk about paradigm shifts. Paradigms are, it's like we know everything. Oh, wait a minute, now we've got a shift. So we're going to go to a new paradigm where we know everything. The paradigm shift that we need to make is that we will never know it all. That we are in a continual science loop where we're learning new things and we're having to reevaluate how we approach these things ongoing. If we start with the natural system, we're going to have much greater chance of success in the long term. One of the priorities that I see is this runoff off the landscape. Human ditching, other land use practices. We see our rivers totally flashy. We're seeing all of the small creeks open up wider and wider, and we're seeing just a trickle of water in the summertime, which is very difficult to rectify. But we can look at these systems and find ways of storing that water on the landscape. Undigging ditches is something I've been throwing around for a while. Wetland creation, retention, detention, ponding in a big way. Cisterns under new buildings. I mean, there's a number of ways that we can do this. So if we're talking about a shared vision, then slowing and storing rainwater runoff becomes one of the guiding principles. And managing land use around long-term water priorities, of course, is what we're talking